This is the Business Storytelling Show with Christoph Trapp. Name a top 20 storytelling podcast and a top 5% podcast globally. Christoph chats with thought leaders and experts to share tips and tricks that can help you tell your company's stories better to drive business results. Available wherever you listen to podcasts, live streamed on major social media channels, and part of the DB&A television network. Available on most U.S. television sets and streaming on Roku and Amazon Fire. Here's Christoph with today's episode. Let's go.
Let's go, business storytellers. How's everyone doing? Hey, thanks for joining me. Today we want to talk about artificial intelligence, and certainly that's an interesting topic we have covered before. And the other part of artificial intelligence that I always find interesting is what's the role of the human, because we still need humans, right? Most of the discussion today will be based, I guess, on Miki de Ketelar's book, Wanted: Human AI Translators, Artificial Intelligence Demystified. If you're watching on Amazon Live, you can see that book highlighted down there in the featured section on the carousel. And of course, it's always listed in the show notes on all the other channels. Or if you're watching on TV, make sure you Google that or go to Amazon or just go to my storefront, authenticstorytelling.net/live. Let's get Miki on the show here from Belgium, right on the other side of the world, so to speak. Miki, thanks for joining us today. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me in the show. Thanks.
And we connected, I don't remember where, but I think you said something very enlightening that caught my eye, and I thought I need to talk to her and get her input and insights on the roles of humans. So thank you so much for joining us. So tell us about your interest in AI and what's your current involvement? What do you do?
Okay, it's a great question to start. So I am by education, I'm actually an engineer, electromechanical engineer. Back in 1992, I actually got in touch first time with artificial intelligence, already with the, what we currently call deep learning. That also says something about my age, but also about the fact that artificial intelligence is not new. But back then we were just like in a winter. There was an academic discipline. Nobody talked about it. There was no budgets available, etc. So I quickly jumped in the start of my career to the other side of ICT, which was more like operational ERP systems, etc. Doing this about 25 years at SAP, IBM, Microsoft 5 years. And then finally, about 10 years ago, got back into my passion is advanced analytics and AI at SAS Institute, a US-based company in North Carolina. And then suddenly, somehow, the external world jumped on the topic of AI, and it all got hyped. And that's where I went like, "Well, wait a minute. The way it's been proposed in marketing leaflets and in communications and the press, that's not how it works." And then, so about 2 years ago, I went back to my roots, which is basically in research, where I said I need to be able to work on the future of AI, making sure that what we are developing, because AI does create value, but what we are developing, we do it in the right way. And that basically is my life. So I've been 25 years in business, starting in research, going to business, and then back to research, trying to make sure that both of them talk to each other.
So what's interesting about that comment is how it's portrayed in the press. I think that's what you said. And, certainly my roots are in journalism. And, once I moved over into marketing, quite frankly, every time I'm quoted for anything, there's always something that's, I don't want to say it's wrong, but sometimes it's out of context, right?
Absolutely.
And it happens, and usually I don't really care because it's close enough. But that is certainly a thing that's happening. That's one thing I love about live streaming, because whatever you say, people can listen to it in context. We don't cut it apart, and that's beautiful. But I'm interested to find out, how is AI portrayed in the media, or how was it?
Well, it's portrayed as a holy grail that's going to solve a lot of questions in an automated way. Making sure that we as a human, we are not having to do certain tasks anymore. And part of that is true. But what you see right now in the media right now is that you have, sort of the people that believe in it, they see the value, they've seen the great stories of Google's, etc. And then you have the people that don't believe in it, and there's sort of tension on that line. And my point of view is it's a tool, it's a technology, it's not something you believe in. It is something that needs to work. And so what I try to do is with my work is to make a demystification, to translate it, what it does and what it doesn't do, because it somehow got lost out there. And then making sure that people get the basics right. So I am not one side or the other side. I sort of I'm in the middle, making sure that people talk and they just get it right. But you find both extremes in media. You've got the believers and the non-believers, and that's not very helpful at the moment in order to move on. Interesting part is if you look at the budgets and the investments that have been done in AI, you see that at least in Europe, we sort of stick to a 17% of adoption rate. Then you go like, why? Why isn't that growing? There's more and more budget going into it. Well, and in fact, it's exactly because of that tension that's on that line between believers, non-believers, that people don't know what to do. They don't know which direction to look at. And that's causing for me an issue that we need to solve soon.
So that is just so fascinating to me when you say believe or not believe in AI. Like, what's there to believe or not to believe? As you said, it's a tool, right? It's like if I say, do I believe in email marketing? Do I believe in Twitter? What does that even mean? Like, is it working or not? And maybe that's my question for you. How can we make AI work for the modern marketer? How does that even look?
Well, it's a very good question. I mean, there's AI. First of all, there's AI in many sectors. There's very good examples of the value of AI. For example, in medical context, AI is able to detect cancers much better than a specialist can do. We have AI in different contexts, but if you look more specific to marketers, so what a marketer needs to do is he needs to inspire his customers. He needs to make sure that his customers love his brand, and so at least they're going to go and buy the products or the services he's creating. But the other challenge is over last years, there's been channels that were added to the mix. We have a whole list of digital channels that were added to the list, and so it's not that easy anymore for a marketer to understand where his customer is, at what time, what his interests are, etc. And so this is somewhere where AI can help. AI is very good in a very complex set of data with different multiple ways of view to get some insights that you wouldn't see anymore through an Excel sheet or through the OpenAI. And so AI can help a marketer to give a better understanding of the interest, the appetite of a customer for a certain product or a certain service. Absolutely.
It's always interesting. So is there a need to convert the non-believers, or is it should we just focus on the people that see the value and move forward there, or how does that look moving forward?
Well, it's interesting to see. If you look into it, the believers and the non-believers, they're actually only 10% of the population in between. Yeah. And I forgot to mention that 90% people don't even understand that's out there. So they're using their apps, they're using mobile phones, they're using their websites, etc., without understanding that there are some algorithms behind them. So I think the first task that we need to do is to make sure that people are at least aware of it, that they understand what digital footprint they leave behind and what is possible with this digital footprint, because some of the practices are correct or are privacy preserving, but some of the practices that I see out there, they're a bit dangerous. So I think first of point is making sure that these 90 people understand what's out there and what does it do. Do we have to convert believers or non-believers? I don't think so. It's for me, it's like a slider that you put and some things that will inspire certain people based on AI will just irritate other people. So where we put that slider for ourselves, what we find an inspiration or an irritation, that's really up to the people themselves. But at least I think we have the task to make sure that they understand what's happening in the world around them.
So, of course, it's interesting. We always focus on the extremes, right? I do it all the time, too. It's like, oh, we have these people over here. We got these people over here. But the people in the middle. And so that really reminded me of, maybe I didn't ask you, and I should have, like out of the gate after you gave us your professional life overview. In a nutshell, what is the definition of AI? How do we think about it? What does that even mean?
Oh, that's such a good question, because indeed there's so many definitions out there. Well, so the definition I tend to use is it's a system that has the ability to learn by itself, so without being programmed line per line by line. And in the second instance, is able to make an autonomous decision based on what it's learned. So both of it together. So the ability to learn by itself, and then the ability to make a decision based on what it's learned. That this at the moment, this year we could say this is the overall definition broadly taken for AI.
So, for example, I was reading a book on Kindle yesterday, right?
Mm-hmm.
In iPad, but in the Kindle app. And it says it's learning my reading speed. And then based on how fast I was reading or skimming in some instances, it was telling me how much longer the book will take. Is that AI or no?
Yeah, that could be perfectly AI. However, it could also just be a simple rule, just looking at how many pages you do. But other topics like other examples of AI is defining automatically what's spam and what's not spam in our inbox. That's a typical AI system that will look at many, many examples of spam, many examples of no spam. It trains the algorithm, and the algorithm after a while is able to just classify by itself what's spam and what's not spam. But as we all know, and that's a very important point to make, is that sometimes we get spam in our inbox and then we get real emails in our spam box. And so that also shows that AI is always having a certain, I would say, error margin. A thing that we need to think of, that AI is not binary. It's not 1 or 0. It just gives the best guesstimate that should go up to 95% and 99%. That's how the people create it. But there's always a tiny error margin on this. And so there's something that got lost in translation. It's not a rule-based system. A rule-based system, each time that it needs to execute a rule, do it exactly the same way. That's a very good thing. However, AI is based on data. It gets insights and data, and then makes prediction based on that data from what it's learned in the past. And on this part, we need to understand that it can have some errors in it, some positive, false positives, etc.
So interestingly, I make mistakes all the time, right? And in fact, one of the things I preach on live streams is there's so many different things that can go wrong all over the place, right? I mean, your internet could go down, my internet could go down, Restream could go down, LinkedIn can go. I mean, it's 100 different things. But I preach to people, just roll with the errors, just roll with the mistakes. In fact, we embrace them on this show, when they happen. It's not a big deal. But my perception is, when it comes to technology, when it comes to AI, when it comes to some of those things out there, are people giving the technology that grace, or if something doesn't work, is the general public forgiving, or do they just go, oh my God, it's not working, because one thing didn't work?
Well, we tend to say that it didn't work. We're much stricter for systems than we are for people. We accept that people make mistakes, but systems, we don't accept them to make mistakes, because we are used to to have rule-based systems around us. And that's a very important point to make, that we should accept and translate much better that AI makes mistakes. And so for me, the definition of AI that I just gave before, the way how far we go in that automation of a decision is all based on the acceptance that we allow it to make mistakes. Because just imagine that you have an autonomous system that can detect cancer. You don't have a little bit of cancer. You either have cancer or you have no cancer. And if you know that this AI system has a 90% accuracy, there's still 3% possibility that it got it wrong. So do you want then a system that autonomous says to the patients directly, you have cancer? Or do you want to give this insight to a doctor who sees this as sort of an extension to his brain, to his own insights, in order to make a better judgment? I think in the last example that I gave, it's much better place to give this insight to a doctor, who then translate to its patient, and not to directly send it to a patient. Whereas in the example I gave about spam, we're not going to die if we have an email arriving in our spam that we just have to, better classify and put it back in our inbox. So we have to define on the context we are, how we are going to accept these uncertainties in the decisions it's making.
Absolutely. And when you mention healthcare, I mean, certainly healthcare has come a long, long way, especially since I actually worked in healthcare and did marketing programs for large healthcare systems. But interestingly, there's still a lot of problems, in my opinion, with technology in healthcare. I'll give you a quick example. If I have a test done, what happens? I get an email from my chart saying, here's my test results, without any context. I have to look at it myself, right? So what you just said is that makes so much sense. You have the physician review the results instead of just sending me a blind email and making me wonder if I'm understanding it correctly or if I'm reading it correctly, because it's never summarized. The machine doesn't work like a journalist. It doesn't give you the oversimplified version. So is that the role of the humans, like
Absolutely.
to analyze it, or how? Talk about that a little bit, if you could.
Yeah, well, so exactly. So for me, the role of the human is to decide how far we want to go in this automation. There are definitely areas where it is not a good idea to fully automate it. Also not in HR domains, for example, selecting the right candidate through an autonomous system and saying, candidate A is better than candidate B. If you know how the systems work behind it, that depends on the words you've been using in your CV. The fact that there's some hidden character, for example, hidden variables. Let me explain. Some people say, well, we don't upload the fact that it's a female or a male for the jobs. Now we are just neutral, making we're doing it right. But what I don't understand is that, for example, just uploading the school where the person has been in can say something about the sex. Or, for example, the email address can say something about the age. Gmail, my mom doesn't have a Gmail address. So if she has another type of email address, that might say something about the fact that she's plus 60 years old. And so having this automated, we might be disqualifying certain people. And this happens in HR context, but also happens, for example, in legal context, where we're going to look into who is dangerous, who's not dangerous, etc. So I think in those contexts where we're going to decide on people's life, we should have humans in the loop. As a principle of having human in the loop and seeing AI as an extension to get insights to what we wouldn't have seen by ourselves. In other domains, however, for example, manufacturing halls, where we want to do preventive maintenance of our machines, where we get a red light when the machine is starting to behave strangely based on maybe a time series that we analyze automatically. Well, in that context, it's perfectly fine, because what can happen is that somebody goes and looks into the machine and say, oh, well, the sensor got it wrong. The machine can go on. There is less dangerous because it doesn't have an impact on people's life. It just has an impact on the quality of a certain product. And so we have to define where is the context of the system and how much of the automation is possible and acceptable. And this is a multidisciplinary debate. It's not something that the engineer by itself can define, nor the business can define, because the business will want to go fast and make money. The engineer is happy when it works. However, we need to include, the different disciplines that look over the decision and define together how much automation should we accept in this context. That's my point of view.
No argument for me on that. But the one thing we hear over and over and over on this show is you have to collaborate with other departments. And I think I heard you say that a little bit too here. Engineering needs to talk to the business owners, the project owners, whatever it might be, product owners. And you have to talk across. And what I found is every time I roll out anything new, there's always unintended consequences that somebody didn't think about. Sometimes it's because of a decision I made. Sometimes it's because of a decision somebody else made. So again, communication is important, even in AI.
Oh, absolutely. And that's the point, is that we do use a different language. If you analyze legal regulations around AI, I will have to reread the text about 5 times until I get it. If I show, the results of our research project, for example, an algorithm that's doing better than the previous algorithm, business doesn't understand, and that's normal. They don't look into formulas. So what I mean is that it's into everybody's role to translate and to find a language that the other person on the table understands. and to step out of our, silo and make sure that what we're saying is explainable and understandable for the other people, because then you can have a dialogue. If you don't understand me right now, it's not your fault, it's my fault. I didn't find the words and the language that made me understandable towards your knowledge. And so this is an effort that everybody, every discipline around the table has to make. And of course, engineers, like, to be honest, I get very excited when technology works. I'm like, oh, wow, this is cool. And then I suddenly think, oh, wait a minute, what's the impact of it? And we don't always have, for example, in psychological point of view, a broad view on what the impact is, the social impact of certain things. For this, we have sociologists or psychologists. And so how interesting it is to talk to them. But then again, they don't understand how our algorithms work. So we have to find this common language. And that just requires an effort of everybody around the table.
I think what's interesting about learning about using a formal language, or a language that everybody understands, it really, again, comes back to that relationship too, because, some people, they don't like to admit that they don't understand or that they didn't get it, right? They just go, okay, and then they move off. So at the end of the day, I do like your comment about own it. If you don't understand what I'm saying because I'm not picking the right words, it's on me. It is. I buy that. But it's also on the other side of the conversation. They have to give you some kind of signals that they don't understand, because I can't read minds as much as people like me do. Let's talk about the legal implications. So I know my home, which is still a far way from being a completely smart home, but I got cameras, I got a smart speaker over there, I got a smart speaker over there, I got a Wi-Fi extender over there, I got another one upstairs. Our TVs have Alexa too. So, the privacy has changed, Mm-hmm. What do people need to consider when it comes to artificial intelligence?
Well, there's two things on this. First of all, indeed, the privacy is we have to realize what data we leave behind and what is done with that data, and how we want to accept that, what's going to be used for. I think what we see is, as soon as you translate as a company and you're transparent about how your data is used, how it's used in order to improve your services or your relationship with that company or your the product, then people are more than happy to accept to share that data. But however, if this data is misused, and if you're reduced to just somebody who provides data, which is then going to be used towards that company that's going to use it for other purposes, without going into details, we know the examples out there, then I go like, well, I don't agree with this. If my data is actually going to become the gold, the fuel of another company in order to make money on my data without me having any results of that, then I don't agree anymore. And you see, especially in Europe, many efforts now towards that direction to keep especially customer data, consumer data, but now also business data close to the source where it was created. And we have sort of created pods now where you can define yourself on who is allowed to use my data and in what context. And it's the ownership is going to go back to the big data provider, being the customer itself or being the company itself. And so we're going more and more towards what we call a decentralized setup of data infrastructures. Whereas if we think about what happened in the last 10 years, we went to a very centralized way of working. We gave our data away, or data was given away to bigger players. And then it was out of our hands, and we were just reduced to nobody. And our data was used for their benefits, but not to our benefits. And so we see that changing now, and we go much more to what was the World Wide Web originally created for, that was for a decentralized setup. Of course, we're not there yet. I would be lying to say that, but especially you definitely see a move over towards that direction of a decentralized setup and giving the power back to the people creating the data. And just because at the moment we sort of feel that we lost the power in that area.
And the other thing, my favorite example is Peter Stamates, CEO at Stamates Communications, said this before. And this is not a technology example, but we need to make any disclosures much simpler than what they are today. I'll give you an example. He says, I'm going to rent skis or whatever it was, going skiing for 30 minutes. And for me to rent that for 30 minutes, I have to read 6 pages of disclosures. That will take me longer then the whole ride will take me. I'm not going to do it. So, whatever you're going to disclose to people, make sure you make it simpler than what people do today. I mean, wouldn't you agree with that?
Absolutely, but that's part of the game, because we all want to use that app. We all want to be on the website and start surfing. And then if you have to read all the text, you don't do it. You just click. You go to the next page and you're on it. And then you forgot what you actually leave behind. And then only later on that you see that your data has been used, to provide you stuff that you don't need, or, to send you or to call you, etc. But, I always say that technology used to be for technologists, like engineers, nerds like myself, but now technology is for everybody, but we don't like to read a manual. So that has changed over the last years.
We don't like to read a manual. That's true. Every time I get anything from Amazon, I don't really read anything. I just, I can put it together without reading anything. And the other thing I noticed that some of the things I order, they don't even come with a manual, honestly. So you have to Google it if you can't figure it out. Now, in the last 30 to 45 seconds here, what's your final advice for people to get started with AI? What should they consider? How should they go?
Well, I think you all should have a common basic sense of what it does, so, leave the science fiction away, that is, something to keep our eyes open and to understand and discuss what we should accept and what we shouldn't accept, but we are far away from that. AI has a level of a 2-year-old, a level of intelligence, but make sure you get these basics right. We all use microwaves without understanding the physics. Well, make sure that we understand AI in the same way, so we understand what the limitations are, the mistakes are, the dangers are, etc. And then I have a very good belief that AI can strengthen our lives and can create a lot of value in it.
Fantastic. At the very least, you have to understand the basics like you understand a microwave, and I certainly understand how that works. That's a fantastic example. Thank you so much for joining us today, for sharing your knowledge. Really appreciate you making the time.
It was my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
That's a wrap. Thanks for tuning in. Please rate and review our show on your favorite podcast channels. And don't forget to share this episode with your networks. We appreciate you. Until next time, let the best stories